Song of the Stones, a woman between worlds. Once there lived a woman who did not belong to her time. Her name was Claire, and she was a healer, skilled in the language of wound and will. She had walked through war, her hands a quiet defiance against death, and carried within her a stillness that came only to those who had learned not to flinch from it. But war's end, and Claire returned home to her husband, Frank Randall, whom she had married before the call to action came. Frank was a scholar and a historian, always scribbling in the margins of time. Together, they journeyed to the Scottish Highlands, a land steeped in mystery and memory, where even Frank's ancestors had left their mark. There, they hoped to remember who they had once been. But unlike Frank, Claire was drawn not to the archives, nor the abbeys, but to the ancient circle on the hill, a ring of standing stones blackened by centuries and humming with something half forgotten. One dawn, when the light spilled gold across the heather, Claire walked alone into the ring. She touched the tallest stone, and the world went dark. When she woke, the sky was the same, but the silence was not. Gone were the quiet hum of machines, the smooth rhythm of distant roads. In their place came the cries of ravens, the scent of smoke, the feel of the earth as something untamed and listening. She had lifted the veil. What lay before her was no dream, but a different time, a wilder one. And though she could not name it, something in her bones knew. She had not fallen, she had been called. Claire stumbled into a clearing, and there stood a man in red, eyes sharp as glass. He looked like Frank, but he was not Frank. He asked her name with the voice of a gentleman, but his words were tinged with cruelty. She answered carefully, knowing something was terribly wrong, and he introduced himself as Captain Jonathan Randall, a distant ancestor to Frank, perhaps. What irony was this? Suddenly, thunder cracked, not from the sky, but from hooves. A Highlander charged through the mist, knocking the redcoat aside, and Claire was taken again. Not by time, but by kilted men with swords. They led her through the rain to a stone hut, hidden in the trees. Within, a hearth glowed, and seated by it, a wounded man. His arm was torn, blood seeping through his plaid. She ignored the wary and brooding faces around her and knelt beside him, her hands swift and sure, binding the wound with cloth and care. He watched her with solemn eyes, saying nothing. When the dressing was done, he simply said, "Thank you, Sassenach." Then they mounted their horses and vanished into the night. The healer and the warrior, drawn together by fate. They rode hard for 2 days, and during those long hours, Claire began to see the fierce loyalty that bound these men together, a pride woven deeper than tartan. At long last, they reached their destination, Castle Leoch. Its stone towers scraped the sky, and inside its high walls the courtyard hummed with life. Horses stamping, servants bustling, voices echoing through the damp morning air. Claire gazed around her, her eyes wide with both wonder and trepidation. She had crossed centuries and now found herself in a world of clan and custom. Uncertain of her future, and surrounded by secrets, some her own and some not hers to tell, Claire made herself useful. She gathered yarrow and comfrey, stitched the limbs of hunters, and tended to fevered children. But even as her hands worked, her mind wandered. She must find her way back to the standing stones, back to Frank. These proud Scots called her guest, but was she truly free? Always nearby was the warrior she had tended. His name was James Fraser, and his quiet presence unnerved her, but he showed her where the wolves denned and where the berries grew wild. He taught her the stories carved in stone, and slowly the quiet between them grew comfortable, like a cloak shared in the cold. Still, something stirred in the dark beyond the village. Whispers, horns, the creak of armour. Storm clouds gathered between crown and clan, darkening the highlands with unrest. One morning, a strange man came, with blood on his blade and war in his eyes. He was the clan's war chief. He claimed to serve a distant crown, one that watched the highlands from across the sea. He brought news that blew through the villages like wind. When his eyes fell on Claire, dark and sharp with suspicion, he said, "The redcoats seek her out. She knows clan business. This healer belongs to us now." Claire's dream of returning to the stones, of reaching through time to the world she had lost, of returning to Frank, whose voice already felt like a memory fading at the edges, began to slip away. The clan watched her. The redcoats hunted her. And she despaired. In all that wild and war-torn land, there was not a soul to whom she could turn. Or so she believed. But Jamie knew well what kind of man Captain Randall was. Years ago, Black Jack, a name whispered with dread among the Scots, had come to the Fraser lands and left behind a legacy of violence. Jamie still bore the scars of that meeting, and now Randall has marked Claire as well. To keep her beyond Randall's reach, both for her safety as well as the safety of the clan, Jamie offered marriage, not for love, not yet, but for shield and shelter. So, before a priest, they wed in the old ways, pledging blood and bone. Claire was now a Scot, and farther still from her dream of returning to Frank. Even as she continued to dream of escape, Claire's days at the castle settled into a quiet rhythm. There was another who walked the path Claire had stumbled upon, though her reasons were darker, and her end not yet written. Her name was Gaelis. She and Claire were drawn together by their shared skill as healers, and something deeper, though neither dared name it. In whispers and glances, they sensed their secrets were not so different. But in a land ruled by superstition, women with knowledge were women to fear. One grey morning, the crowd came for them. Claire and Gaelis were seized, bound, and thrown into the cold darkness of a cell, accused of witchcraft, their herbs called poison, their healing hands called cursed. They stood before the mob and were condemned. But Gaelis turned to Claire and whispered, 1968. Then she cried out, "I am witch, she is not," thus disentangling their fates. Before the fire could claim them, Jamie came, fierce as a storm loosed from the Highland hills. He rode into the chaos, through the frenzied cries and flickering torches, and pulled Claire from the circle of fire and fury. Gaelis stood behind, head high, eyes unflinching. Dazed, Claire thought, could she know the stones too? Whatever power and purpose bound Gaelis to this time and place, it was not fear. Claire looked back once, but Gaelis did not. Her fate was not theirs to know. And Jamie asked no questions. Not yet. They raced across the moors for hours and finally found shelter in a hollow of trees. There, beside a trickling burn and the hush of pine, Claire told Jamie everything about stones that sang and a world yet to be. He listened, silent and still, his eyes mirroring a combination of shock and sorrow. And when she had finished, he said, "I believe you, Sassenach." Jamie took her to the place where it all began, the circle of stones that whispered through time. There he gave her the choice, to go or to stay. "There is nothing for you here but danger, Sassenach," he said. Claire's heart and mind waged silent war, but in the end she turned away from the stones, from the future, from Frank, and chose Jamie instead. Even with Gaelus's tragic end casting a shadow over what may lie ahead, she stepped into the unknown, carried not by certainty, but by love. Alas, Claire was to learn that peace never lingered long in those times. Captain Randall was not a man to forget unfinished business. And Jamie was part of his past. He had left unsettled. One night, he came for him. Jamie was taken, dragged into the dark by redcoats. Claire's cries echoed long after the hoofbeats had faded. All knew he was in great peril. They had seen the wounds Jamie bore on his back at the hands of Blackjack Randall. But Claire was no longer just a healer. She was fire and fury and will. With the men who loved him and the plan of a warrior's wife, she found Jamie in the fortress of his enemy, and she brought him home. The Highlands were no longer safe for Claire and Jamie. A war was coming between the English redcoats and Dougal's rebels. A rising Claire knew was doomed to fail. It would be the end of the proud Scottish clans, and hunted as they both now were, Claire and Jamie could do nothing to change the tragic course of history. So they left Scotland, bound for France, forsaking all they had ever known, ever loved, in her time and in his. But on the ship, Claire whispered to Jamie the secret held close in her heart. A child, the past behind them, the future within her. Two fugitives, one love, carrying hope across the sea. The end. Though told as a fairy tale, Song of the Stones is rooted in the culture and conflict of 18th century Scotland. It was a time of unrest when English rule pressed hard against Highland resistance, and whispers of rebellion stirred in castle halls and hidden glens. Superstitions ran deep, and women who practiced the healing arts could be hailed as saviours or condemned as witches. Though this tale is imagined, the world it inhabits is not. The Jacobite rising of 1745, the Battle of Culloden, and the brutal dismantling of the Highland way of life are tragic realities of Scottish history. After Culloden, the British Crown imposed harsh penalties on the Highland clans, banning their tartans, disarming their warriors, and extinguishing their language, customs and lands. Though Claire and Jamie's story is fiction, it is told against the backdrop of a hauntingly tragic piece of Scotland's past. It is this weaving of fact and fiction that gives Outlander its enduring power. Diana Gabaldon's novel does more than tell a love story. It transports us into a richly detailed world where the past still breathes. Many of the characters who pass through this tale have roots in truth. The Comte Saint-Germain was a real 18th century figure surrounded by mystery and myth, rumoured to be an alchemist, a spy, and even immortal. Others, like the scheming Duke of Sandringham, reflect the kinds of political power players who moved between court and battlefield, choosing loyalty by opportunity. If you've never read Outlander, it is more than a historical fantasy. It's a portal, with unforgettable characters, sweeping landscapes, and the ache of a vanishing culture. Gabaldon's novel is the inspiration behind this fairy tale. And once you step into her world, you may never wish to leave. And if you love the book, the Outlander television series is a stunningly beautiful tribute to the entire Diana Gabaldon 8-novel Outlander series.